So there's some question about this blue background um, as maybe being people not wanting that blue background because it will print out as gray, I guess, if you use black and white. It might interfere with some of the gray that you're seeing on here, although it will be separated by this black line, so it's not that big of an issue. But there are two ways that you can change this. So one way is you could select the plane, so you can see I'm middle mouse dragging and it indicates that it's selected here, and you could assign a new material to it. So if we do that, or actually maybe the best thing to do is just to change the material that's already on it. So if you open up the attribute editor, and you can do that, shortcut is Control A, and that just gives you more information about whatever you have selected. So I've got that shape selected right now. So I just left mouse dragged over to grab that, and it shows me certain information about it. But if I keep going over, it's going to show me this thing called the background shader. You can see that's the blue thing. If I want to change that under the color here, I can just click on that and change it to white, and it will change all of them to white. And if you wanted to render it against white, that would be probably the easiest way. There are other ways to do it, but you still need to have a plane that's in the midline, so when you do your lateral render, it blocks out that background part of the mandible. So you need those planes there, but if you want to change them to white, you can do that. So again, just to show again, if I select that plane, I hit Control A to open the attribute editor. If I don't see this background shader come up here right away, it just means I'm on another tab, and I can just use these arrows to go over to the tab that I want and change the color from blue to white. Okay, does that make sense? Well, whether it makes sense or not, I don't know, but can you follow the steps? And I'll post this too. So the other thing that came up, and I did talk about this and it was recorded in one of the other videos, but when you do your renders, they often come out darker when you open them up in another program. And I mentioned that you have to adjust the exposure because the rendering in Maya actually works like a camera, and it tries to mimic real-world lighting conditions. And the lighting conditions don't quite match, doesn't match the color conditions on your screen. So the white point on your screen, what it perceives as white, is different. So when you open up your image in Photoshop, you can correct this by adjusting the exposure. So if you have your image open, you can see this one goes quite dark here in the core shadow. But with the image open, if I go to Image in Photoshop and to Adjustments and to Exposure, the thing we want to change is this gamma correction. Gamma correction is the white point, or the sort of temperature of your screen. If you change this to 2.2, then it will go back to what you originally saw in your first render of Maya before you saved it out. So when you bring it into Photoshop, when you're going to do your scaling and stuff, you can adjust the exposure under Image, Adjustments, Exposure, and just change the gamma to 2.2. You can see it goes back to its original. If I do this again, it'll get brighter and brighter, so you can only do it once. Okay? So there's a question about how can you make that inset, so the circular part of your image. So you're going to be taking this image here, printing this out, and this will be your guide for tracing and stippling, right? You're going to trace over this. And when you're done, you will have your beautifully rendered stippled image, and you're going to scan that, and it's still going to be too big because we've scaled this one up to 1.5 times its actual size. For your final image, you're going to do that scaling process to go back down to the original size. But before you do that, you can use the large size for the inset if you want. So you scan your image, and before you change the size, you can save out one for the inset. So imagine this is my stippled version. So I might want to just to save this as where's my desktop? So occlusal stipple at 1.5 something. I'll save this. And so now, if I just want to use this part as my inset, I can crop this image. Now, you'd want to save it out of the other version for the whole image, but to do that, in Photoshop you can crop an image. So those of you who've taken 200, you've done this before, I'm sure, but here in the toolbar you can use the crop tool, and the shortcut is C to open that. And you can either just click and drag in the area that you want to crop out. If you hold down Shift, it will lock it into a square shape. And then, hold on a sec. And then you can move this around to center on the area you want to use for the inset. You can grab the corners to change the size that you want to use. So if you're focusing on the two last molars, M2 and M3, you can do that. If you want to show all three molars, you can do that, whatever features you're trying to show. And if I hit return, then I'll have a smaller version, or a cropped version. It's still at 1.5 times the actual size. So now if you want to put it in a circle, there are different ways you can do that. I would probably do that in Photoshop here by creating another layer on top of this. So if we open our layers palette, so we just have our original image. So I don't have any space here. If we create a new layer on top of that, I can select a circle and then fill in the outside of that with white to block off the part that I don't want to see. So let's say I just want to focus on M2 here, so this middle molar. So I've cropped it down to that size. Now I can use my selection tool here. So this is a Marquee selection. You can see in the toolbar the dotted rectangle, but if I hold it down, I can select an elliptical Marquee selection tool. So I can make a circular selection. And then I can just click and drag, and if I hold Shift, it will lock it into a circular shape. And so now I have a selection, and I just want it to be around the tooth that I want to focus on. And with that selection tool still selected, if I go inside of the selected area, the little marching ants here, I can move this selectable area around so I can focus on the part that I want to see. And so now what I want to do is I want to fill in everything outside of this with white. Okay? So how do I do that? Well, I can do it in a couple of ways. Sorry, again, I'm running out of space here. Let me just change my screen. And I can do that. Sorry, you can't see it because the screen isn't big enough, but I've got the black and white color areas down at the bottom of my toolbar. I'm trying to get this to shrink. Oh, there we go. So right now it's red and white. So if I just click on these little icons down here, I'll change it back to black and white. And now if I just hit Command and delete, it will fill in whatever I've selected with the background color here, which is white. So Command and delete. But obviously it's filled in the wrong part, right? So I'm going to undo. So what I want to do is invert this selection so I fill in the area outside of it. And so if you just go to Select and Inverse, or it's also Command-Shift-I, it reverses the selection. Now it's this area that's being selected. And if I do the same thing, Command-Delete, it fills in the outside with white. And then you can save this image as your inset and bring that into Illustrator. And last week I showed you how to draw circles and stuff in Illustrator. You can draw a circle that would fit around here. I would do it in Illustrator rather than here so you can adjust it to match things later on. And just save as inset. When you're saving a TIFF actually has the ability to record all of your layers in a file, but you don't want the layers. So you can just say at this stage, I'm sorry it's right down at the bottom of the screen, but discard layers and save a copy. So we'll save it as a TIFF, but without that separate layer of the circle in the image. Okay. Is there anything else anybody you want me to show again in Maya? Setting anything up? Yeah. Yep. If the measurement is in the paper, then you can use that. If all of the numbers are there, I did show you last week how to measure in Maya. I'll show you again just in case you want to verify. But if you do want to measure anything in Maya, and part of the reason I wanted to show this was because this is something you can do with digital objects. You can take measurements from them. So in Maya, to take measurements, you can go to the Create menu, to the Measurement Tools, and then a Distance tool. And then you'll get this crosshair. And if you just click twice, so let's say I click the bottom of the mandibular border here, and then click up at the mental foramen, it's going to give me a distance of 1.65 centimeters. These are centimeter units. So you can make those measurements here too if you want to verify to see if it's correct. But the ones in the paper will be the official ones that are published. Okay, yeah, so if the measurements aren't in the paper, then you have to take the measurements. Now you could do this in Photoshop too. If you've got it scaled properly, you can use the rulers and the guides like we did before. You can make a measurement there, but you can also do it here in Maya. But you'll note that I'm doing it in the side view. You can't do these things in the perspective view because it doesn't know how far from the camera you want to place those points. When it's in the side view, it places it in the middle plane of the world, both measurements. So even though they're not on the outside of the mandible, it will actually give you an accurate linear measurement straight up and down. Okay, thanks, that was a good question. Okay, so I'll just come around and I'll see how people are doing. I've got a sample of work that I'm doing for this too, and we can talk about stippling and all that kind of stuff.